Welcome to the Groovy Scripting for ScriptRunner webinar. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We're really excited and think that this will be a massively valuable webinar for your attendance. We're going to give folks just a couple of moments to get started, so to get logged in and get situated. So while we're here, hello, thank you, welcome everyone. So glad to see you all. We're not going to wait very long before we kick off. Because there are people joining by the second. We are joining from all over the world. Lots of folks coming in. We did try and get some hold music for the session, but we couldn't work that out necessarily. But it would have been something exquisitely tasteful, I promise.
I just assumed we were going to do something from The Witcher, like the new theme.
Yeah, I think that, everybody's talking about tossing a coin to The Witcher. I haven't heard it yet, but you're into it?
I briefly watched that because someone else in my house was, and it is as catchy as they say.
Oh my. There are, of course, when a song is good, there are immediately cover versions of it in every style. So I've seen those flying around the internet. I'll have to check it out. I tell you what, as interesting as it is to hear us talk about modern pop culture, I think it's time to begin, Jonny and Alex. So again, I say welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here for the Groovy Scripting with ScriptRunner webinar. We have just a few slides to go through before we kick off and I turn it over to Jonny. We got a little bit of housekeeping we need to take care of, all right? So hopefully everyone's hearing all right through your speakers or headsets. We are recording today's session, so we will be sharing the recording of today's session with everyone who registered. This will be available to you, so if you miss something, you'll get to rewatch and live the magic again and again at your convenience. We know that you are going to have questions for Jonny and Alex, and we want to hear them. But we ask that you put the questions into the question box in GoToWebinar, and depending on the nature of your question, we might talk about it right during the webinar. We might also hold off until the Q&A. Now, I cannot promise you that we're going to cover all your questions. I can't. I'm sorry. I would love to, but unfortunately, it's just not the nature of the beast. So we will try and follow up with as many of you via email as possible, but we always recommend going to the Atlassian community for help with our tools. We also have a fantastic support team available, and we will, depending on how this goes, we might do more recordings like this in the future. So maybe if your question is one, we might actually ask if you'd be interested in doing something like this. But before we get on to what this actually is, let me introduce everybody. First, you have me. My name is Ryan Spilkin. I am the technical evangelist at Adaptavist. I'm also the host of Adaptavist Live, the Atlassian ecosystem podcast, which Andra is going to share in our share in the chat. Feel free to subscribe. We do a bi-weekly roundup of all the news that's fit to print on audio in the Atlassian ecosystem. Joining us today is Atlassian Community Events Leader in Austin, Texas, Alex Christensen. Hi, Alex. Thank you so much for being here. Good to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And Alex is the initiator of this conversation, and it came about with the one and only Jonny Carter, an engineering lead at Adaptavist. Jonny, hi, good to see you as always.
Good to be here.
And so, with that being said, remember, and submit any question that you have in the question box. We will be answering some during the webinar and some during the and some afterwards during the Q&A. Please remember, Jonny is going to be taking you through a fairly deep technical solution, and he'll tell you more about that soon. So we won't be able to get to everybody, but we definitely want to have your questions, and we will follow up with you as we can. And with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Alex and Jonny to present the solution that we are going to give today and talk about what we're here for. So Jonny, take it away.
All right. So this the solution we're going to talk about today came up in a conversation with Alex at an Atlassian community event. He knew I was on the ScriptRunner team. He was working on trying to solve a problem with JQL. And Alex, do you want to just describe that? Say a bit more about what the problem was?
Yeah. So as a community events leader, I get the opportunity to see a lot of different people within the Atlassian community, and this is kind of a common. It's not like the exact same scenario every time, but a very similar problem that I've seen users have is, let's say you have two different systems. You have Jira, and then you have some other system that you're trying to integrate with, and maybe you have a Jira issue that correlates to some object in that other system, whatever the case it might be. Now, maybe it's in a lot of cases, let's just, for example, say it's like a version that you want to track of your software, but that data is it's saved in the other tool outside of Jira, but maybe not necessarily in the way that you want it, and maybe you've done like a data dump from that system into Jira into like just a multi-line text field, so it's there in Jira for you to be able to view, but it's not really easy to parse. And there's a lot of other functionality I might be able to get out of Jira if I use something else, like a version field, for example. So a problem that people tend to have is trying to parse that data and make it usable. So
cool. Yeah, that's exactly it. So the how this conversation went. And I'll actually go ahead and share my screen and start with the venerable ScriptRunner documentation.
Jonny, yeah. Sorry to interrupt. I just want to take 1 second to remind folks that are on the GoToWebinar that you are able to adjust where our faces are. So Jonny's going to set up the screen to a what we hope that everyone can see. But if you move our faces over to the left, you might get a better view of the action. Carry on, sir.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. That's a helpful tip for negotiating the webinar. So, what you can see here is I've set up a kind of dummy instance with data similar to the problem that Alex described. So you can see I've got some issues in a project called Webby. And in this project, I have a custom field called external system version. And this is our hypothetical data dump. You can see the versions here are, there's like some kind of code package, com example, what's it, some sort of hash, maybe that's a git commit, and then what looks like a date and a time. And then finally here at the end, we have something you might recognize as a software version, 99.1.0. And the initial conversation Alex and I were having was, okay, I want to find all the issues that that date is within a particular range. Another thing you can notice about this is the field is comma separated, so some of them have multiple versions in them. And as I was talking with Alex about this, the first place we went was to the ScriptRunner JQL function expression. We were trying to parse that data. And as I was just kind of browsing around the docs page, I said, wait a minute, these are versions. We have JQL functions related to versions that let you query by release date and things like that. What if we actually just imported this data into the project's version field? So that's what I'm going to demonstrate today. We will get back to using the JQL functions at the end, but we're going to go straight to the script console for the solution. So if this was, an episode of Car Talk, if you listen to NPR, we're going to the garage for this one. So to do that, I'm gonna navigate to the script console. You can get to that from any Jira administration screen. There will be on the left-hand side some navigation, one of which is for ScriptRunner. You can go to the console. You can also, if you're hip Jira admin, you can use the good old GG shortcut and just find any of the ScriptRunner extension points right there.
Now we are going to talk about a few other shortcuts today that I'm excited to share, because if there's anything that I enjoy, it's a keyboard shortcut. I'm very boring. Yeah.
It's the only way to work.
Yeah.
Dude, keyboard shortcuts are awesome, man.
Exactly. People love keyboard shortcuts. Everybody loves a good keyboard shortcut. And in fact, ScriptRunner, because this is a fresh instance of Jira where I've just installed ScriptRunner, I've got this note about the keyboard shortcuts I'm going to be using for the code editor. And one reason we want to emphasize this is a lot of the feedback we get from people who use ScriptRunner is they say, maybe I know how to code in a language, but it's a little intimidating to get started with Groovy. It feels brand new. And I also have to navigate around the Atlassian API. That's really new. And we want to, part of the reason we're going to the garage on this, rather than to some of the higher level solutions that ScriptRunner can do, is we want to demystify that and make this a little less intimidating. So I'm going to go ahead and hide this notification, but you'll see me use all three of these shortcuts: Control Space for completions, parameters in a method, and Control J for the Java doc throughout the presentation. And because this script is liable to get a little woolly, I'm going to go to full screen mode. So what the things we're talking about doing are really two big tasks that we're going to try to do. The first thing is, because this project that we're dealing with doesn't have any versions in it right now, right? The premise is we've just had a data dump from this external system. None of these issues have a fixed version, and the project itself doesn't have any fixed versions to pick from. So the first thing we want to do is go through the external system version fields in the system, parse them into actual Jira versions, and then for each of these issues, we want to update them with the appropriate fixed version so that the fixed version field actually has the right value. So the big question staring at the blank canvas is, where do I start? Well, 90% of the time when you're writing a script in ScriptRunner, the first class you're going to reach for is the good old component accessor. Or if you're in ScriptRunner for Confluence or ScriptRunner for Bitbucket, it'll be the component locator. But this script provides a window into the vast majority of the Atlassian API. And since I know one of the things I want to do is create versions, I can just look at the component accessor, type .version, hit Control Space, and lo and behold, there's already a convenience method there to get hold of the version manager.
Wow, it's almost like you knew that was coming.
Yeah. And yeah, full disclosure, I've had some time to think about this problem. So I know I'm going to be creating versions in a project, so I'm going to guess I'll probably need the project manager as well. And I want to update the issues, so I'm probably going to need one of the classes to manage issues. And I'm going to show you all how to use the issue service today. There is also an issue manager, but whenever possible, when you're dealing with the Atlassian API, we recommend you use the classes ending in service. And the reason for that is that they will enforce a lot of the business logic that's part of the Atlassian application. So if you're, if you try to make an update to an issue that would fail a validator, the service classes will give you much more usable and readable feedback from that. So just be aware that's what's going on with that. So having kind of got hold of the things I'm going to deal with, another thing I know I want to do is loop through all the issues in a project. So for that, if you want a list of issues, one of the most straightforward ways to get them is a JQL query. So I'm going to go ahead and try to figure out how to perform a search in the Atlassian API. And if I just do component accessor.search and hit Control Space, I don't get any results back. So anytime there's not a convenience method on the component accessor, you can usually get to other classes with the get component method. And so I'm just going to see if there's anything in the API related to search. Oh, there's quite a bit. But again, I want to look for services here, so I'll narrow it down to the search service. And lo and behold, there is that class. So I'm going to go ahead and get a hold of the search service. All right, cool. So now the question for me is, how do I use the search service to perform a search, right? And obviously I know, because I'm an Atlassian plugin developer and I have the inside baseball, but if you're just a scripter, you might wonder. So I'll just look at the search service and see what methods are available there. So this is one way you can use the script console to kind of explore the Atlassian API. And I see there's a method here called search. But I can tell just calling it doesn't work. I need to pass it some information. And if I hit Control P, you'll see I get the parameters there. I need an application user, which I can kind of intuitively guess is probably the user that this query is going to run as. I need a query and something called a pager filter. Now, if I'm not sure what those are, I can go to the method I'm dealing with, hit Control J, and ScriptRunner will open the Atlassian Java documentation. So this is, and notably, we'll open the specific version for the version of Jira I'm running. So for this example, I'm running on Jira 8.6.1, but in your instance, you'll get to the right version of the docs for your instance.
And one more time, what was that shortcut?
Control J will open the Java docs.
It's a good one.
Indeed. So looking at this, I can tell that if I can, something you'll notice is these types here for these parameters, I can actually follow these links and get more information about how to build these things, what they are, and how to deal with them. So if you're ever like, well, what is a query object, right? I mean, that's a way you can explore it. I'm gonna gloss over that a bit just so it's not hours of me browsing the Atlassian API for you.
Because trust me, guys, trust me, folks, he really does do that on a regular basis. It's just what Jonny does.
It's what they pay me to do. But for now, I'm going to skim over that and just kind of show the answer real quick out the gate. So I know that to create a query object, I need the JQL query parser. And so Jonny, feel free to interrupt me, fellas, if at any point you have a question.
Well, I was just going to ask you, Jonny, could you just tell us what you're bringing into this script so far? So far, we've got the component accessor, the search service, and the query parser, right? We're also, so you have basically made it to where you can run a JQL search in the script, right?
Exactly.
Have we brought anything else in here yet?
Well, one of the things I'm going to need is the user for this script, which in this case, I'm just going to use myself. But if you wanted to use a service account in a script, you could do that. So I'll go ahead and grab the Jira authentication context and the logged in user. And then finally,
I had a quick thing. So I noticed that you were using, you're not using like the get methods of the component accessor. So like for version manager, you said component accessor dot version manager instead of component accessor dot get version manager as the function. Can you kind of talk about like why you're doing that instead of using the get method?
Yeah, so this is actually a good point. So if you're a Java developer or lots of languages have this convention, you're probably more used to seeing something like component accessor.get version manager. This is just a cool feature of the Groovy programming language that powers ScriptRunner, which is it will take those same methods and create these little convenience properties. So instead of having to say get version manager, you can just say dot version manager. So any getters will be available that way. It helps make your code a little more terse, a little easier to read, which is really valuable in a scripting language.
Is this
Very
for
nice.
all of Groovy, or is this just for the Atlassian API?
All Groovy.
Oh, cool.
Any
Any
class
get
that you
method?
import, yep, any class that you import that has a get method will work that way. Likewise, if you're dealing with a class that has a set method, like a setter method, which issue service doesn't, but you could, for instance, if there was a set issue service on component accessor, you could use this syntax to provide a value. Now, obviously, I'm going to get an error here because it says I can't set a read-only property of the issue service. But yeah, that's a nice fact about Groovy.
So Jonny, before you go on, we have some great questions coming in from our watchers today, and thank you so much for sending those questions. Keep them coming. Remember, we're not going to answer them all during this portion of the webinar, but we will try and get to as many of them as possible. However, there's a few that I think are actually really important to ask now. So Joey asks, can you address the difference between the script console and the script editor?
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, I almost built this script in the script editor. And the short version is the script editor is just a new feature of ScriptRunner, and it provides a way not just to write scripts, but to save them on your Jira server. The script console here I'm dealing with is transient. And while we do use some local browser storage to make sure you don't lose your script on an accidental page refresh, the script editor is more like dealing with a file editor or even like an IDE where you can actually create files in your script roots and save them for reuse.
So theoretically, if we were to write this script in the console, we could copy it and paste it into the editor for saving for later.
Absolutely. And the main reason I didn't use the editor for today's presentation was just that I'm at such a Zoom level that it would have been just a little crowded on the screen. But yeah, we have big ambitions for the script editor. We want that to be kind of the default editing experience, if you will, so that you can easily either switch between console and editor, but we're still working with the UX team at Adaptavist to figure out exactly how we want that to look.
And
so
one more question. Yeah, thank you so much, Joey, for asking that. One more that I'm gonna drop on you from Mathis. Are all the ScriptRunner classes contained within Get Component?
That's a good question, and the answer is no. So most of the Atlassian services you'll deal with are accessible through the component accessor, but if you browse around the ScriptRunner documentation and look at the code examples, you'll see other ways that we get hold of parts of the Atlassian API, whether that's just good old, new some class, plain old Java constructor, or some other means of getting a hold of it. So the component accessor is really a gateway to Atlassian's API. So anything that's outside Atlassian's API, like some of the Java time APIs that I'm going to be using here in a bit, you wouldn't get them through the component accessor. So it's a place to start to talk to Jira, not a place to start to talk to all of the Java libraries you might use. Does that make sense?
Cool. Yeah, thank you, Jonny, so much. Please keep those questions coming. Jonny, go ahead and carry on.
Great. So that last parameter that I saw for this method was the pager filter. Now, if I just pull that in, I can see that the pager filter has this method to get an unlimited filter. And for my purposes, that's fine. I can just browse through all the issues in this project because there's only 100. If you were building a script that you were going to run maybe multiple times, you might want to set a page size and iterate through the issues. So that's a detail we're glossing over, but be advised, this is slightly quick and dirty scripting that I'm doing. So moving on from those results, I want to loop through all the issues in them. And in Jira 8, it's going to be in the, I believe it's .results. And in Jira 7, it will be .issues. So that's actually the only difference in this script that I'm going to write today between Jira 7 and Jira 8 is that when you do a search to get the results in Jira 8, you call .results. In Jira 7, you would call .issues. So just as a quick sanity check, I want to make sure that I've actually got the issues that I want from my JQL query. So I'm going to use this logging statement to write out to the console. And I'm going to run that. And you'll notice that if I look at the logs tab, I do indeed get my little log message looking at issue Webby 100 all the way down to the first issue in the project. So this is another difference between the script console and the script editor actually. It's just that run button so that you can quickly and instantly run the script and see the results. This is also a really good thing to do before you start making writing script code that actually makes changes to your system.
Make the right changes.
Yeah, you can kind of double check that you're getting the results back that you would expect.
It goes back to that idiom of measure twice and cut once.
Exactly. Another useful thing about this is I'm doing this in a test instance. And of course, we always recommend to our customers when you're writing a script for the first time, do it in a test copy of your Jira instance. Don't do it in your production Jira instance right out the gate. All right, so let's remember what I'm trying to do with these issues now that I've got hold of them. I want to get the value from this external system version custom field. I want to parse it out and create versions from it. So that actually makes me realize I missed a class that I'm going to need for this. In order to get a custom field value, I'm going to want to get a hold of the custom field manager. So let's get back to the component accessor. And then to get the custom field that I'm looking at, I should be able to just get it by its name of external system version.
Careful, careful. Of course, yeah, as those of you who are Jira admins already know, you can have multiple custom fields with the same name in Jira. We want to make sure that we are selecting the right one.
Indeed. In fact, if I try to use the method get custom field object by name, the script console will even warn me a little bit and say, hey, this method is deprecated. Use get custom field objects by name instead. But if I do that, I know, and if I look at the API documentation, I can find out this is going to return a collection of custom fields. Now, I know my instance well enough to know I can just take the first one of these, and that's the external system version field I want. If you were actually in a situation where your script was dealing with a custom field that you might have more than one, there are ways to limit this down so that you only get the ones for the context that you're dealing with. Again, going to gloss over that for today, but be advised, this is a place where your mileage may vary. Okay, so I've got my custom field. I've got a hold of the issue I want to look at. Let's actually try to get that custom field value. And why not just use a logging statement to make sure it's right?
I say that a lot. Why not just use a logging statement?
And as a quick aside, I'm gonna do something a little strange here. I don't need to look at all 100 issues every time I run my script to sanity check myself. So I'm just gonna take the first 10 by taking this range from the list. If I run that, lo and behold, I do indeed get the custom field values that I would expect. All right. So now what I want to do is take that custom field data, which I've got an example right here, and translate that into versions. So if I'm going to do that, I know I'm probably going to need to call version manager dot create, right? And if I look at the Java documentation for that, actually, is there a create method? Ah, it's create version. And if I look at the Java documentation for that, I can see, oh, the first one it took me to here is deprecated. And it says to use this version of create version instead. So let's go with that. Okay, so I know that I'll need the version name, which again is just this last part of the version here, like 100.3.0. I'll need a start date for the version, which can be null, given that my data here only contains one date, and I know, as the person familiar with this data, that that's the release date. I'm just going to say the start date should be null. But let's focus on getting a hold of the version name. All right.
Jonny, a quick question. I think could a quick question. I think that this one will really help clarify for our watchers. Is the .first colons referring to the first custom field in the UI or in the collection returned? And that's from Mathis.
Yeah. So .first is referring to the first one in the collection returned. So that's very arbitrary, right? That's a great question, Mathis, because yeah, it doesn't mean first in the UI, and the reason for that is that when I call custom field manager get custom field objects, that's going to return every custom field in Jira, right? So if you go to the Jira admin custom field management screen, anything with this name would get returned. You could also, if you knew a bit more about the custom field, you could try to find it and filter it by the, when you have different custom fields with the same name, Jira makes you put them in different contexts. So what you would do is filter by the context, and a context is just defined by a project and an issue type. And so you would, probably what I would do is actually search for it inside this loop where I have the issue. The issue would be able to provide me a project and an issue type, and I could get the right field for the context.
Nice. Thank you, Jonny. Thank you, Mathis.
Yeah.
Keep those questions coming. We really do appreciate them. I am going to let Jonny code on for a while, but keep the questions coming. So, and I'd like, if we have time for Q&A, we'll try and get to as many as we can. Remember, we will follow up with all of you via email, if not.
Yeah, totally. Something I'm noticing here is the static type checker is telling me I have a problem. Oh, and that is that I took that .first off there, didn't I, while I was talking about this? So I'm going to put that back on. So be advised, those red lines in your script console can really save your bacon if you start talking too much about your script and making changes to it. So I want to take that value, and the first thing I know about it is that it's separated by commas. So if I've got multiple versions, they'll be comma separated. So I want to split that up. So let's just take the imported version, and tokenize is the Groovy method to split by strings. We've got any Pythonistas in the crowd. This is just like split. And we'll say that's the rough versions. And immediately I realize, oh, I've got a rough set of versions here, and I want to get all the versions that apply to this issue. So what I'll want to do is take the real versions and get those by looping through the rough versions and creating the versions from there. So I'll say rough version from the real versions, and this .collect, if you're a JavaScript developer or a modern Java developer, that's just like the map method. This is just a Groovy collection method. It's just like map. Loop through the list and return a new item for every list. So from that rough version, I need to further split up each of these pieces is separated by a period, and I only need, as far as I know, I need the date and I need that last bit. So I'm going to tokenize the rough version string on the period. And I know in this case the data is regular enough that I can just use the array indexes. If you're a HIP developer, you could use regular expressions as well, but I'm not going to belabor the discussion too much with that. So let's take, if I'm counting right, the 1, 2, 3, 4, the first 4 parts I can discard. The 5th part is the date, and then the 6th, 7th, and 8th parts are the version number. So I'll say my date is parts, and because lists are 0 indexed, the first part will be 0 and the 5th part will be 4. And then the version name is going to be all the parts after that. And I'm just going to join those back together so that instead of getting a list of numbers, I get the list of numbers separated by a period.
So we're just transforming the data at this point, right? We're taking the information from that custom field, doing a little Autobot action on it, and spitting it out, right?
Indeed. And again, we can do a quick sanity check, right? And say found the version name. Now,
Leonard mentions, and this is something we might just comment on. Leonard mentions that the log.debug default is warn, so maybe we need to say that the dev system should be set to debug level and the prod system kept to warn, as to keep the log statements in the script. That sounds...
Yeah, that's a great point. So my system that I'm running this on will display the debug logs, but yours probably won't by default. The way to deal with that is on your development system, you could change the logging levels, which we won't go into here. Or if you really want to see the logs and you can't be bothered to change that, you can change these logging statements to log.warn as just a quick and dirty way to get the data. Yeah, good call, Leonard. Thanks for the hot tip. So yes, you can see it does look like I'm getting the version numbers that I want. I've got this version and then this date string. So let's go ahead and start plugging those in. So I know I've got my version name right, and I know the start date for my release is just going to be null. But now, if I look back at the create version method that I'm dealing with, I realize I have a problem in that the release date needs to be a date object, but all I have here is a plain string. So I'm going to need to transform that string into a date. And the canonical classes for doing this are in the java.time package. So I'm just going to import those real quick. And we'll start trying to parse that date string into an actual date.
Jonny, a quick question. Are you able, this comes from Thomas, can you tell tokenize to split it to max 5 parts instead of 7?
As in call tokenize with a parameter? Actually, that's a good question. I don't know. If I wanted to do that, if I just wanted to get the first 5 parts, I would probably just do something like this, or take a range from those parts. But yeah, there's definitely more than one way to skin that cat. If we look at tokenize in the Groovy documentation, it's a bit rough looking, but there are a few different method signatures here, one of which takes a list of delimiters, as well as so there are options.
Okay, so in the interest of time, I'm not going to interrupt you with any more questions. Code on, my man.
All right, no problem.
Oh, we want to get this one to finished, right? We want to see it. We want to see the miracle work before we derail too heavily.
No, it's fine. And actually, if you want to ask questions about this later, we're going to be posting this script on the Adaptavist library, so people can definitely chime in. I make no pretensions to be the best coder ever, so maybe we can get some suggestions for improvement out of this. All right, and then real quick, I want to check the date format I'm dealing with here. Looks like it's a 4-digit year, 2-digit month, 2-digit day, the letter T, the hour, the minute, and the second. And then I'll also need to provide time zone information, which in this case, I'm just going to use the system default. All right, so that should be basically my release date, although since it looks like the Atlassian version manager is still using the old Java time APIs, I'm going to have to convert that. Here. All right, so that should be my version name and the dates I need for it. Next, I need a description. And you know, it occurs to me, I had thought about throwing away that hash, but there's no reason I couldn't just throw it in the description. Up next, I'm going to need the project ID, which I can just get from the issue. And you'll notice here in the Java doc that the project ID is a long. That's just a kind of number. A lot of Atlassian objects have a numeric ID under the hood. So instead of having a key like WEBI, there's also a numeric ID. A lot of the APIs will require you to get that. From after that, the next thing I need, oh, this is interesting. I need the ID of the version I want to schedule this after. And this actually poses what may be the most interesting problem in this webinar, which is as I'm looping through these and creating versions, I'm going to need to reference back to the versions I've already created and find the one that should be prior to the one I'm just creating. So just to real quickly think about this, I know I can get the versions from project.versions. And I'll go ahead and turn that into a list for simplicity. And so I really want to do two things in figuring this out. Oh, and I'll actually need to use the project object, not the project. The first thing I want to do is find all the versions that currently exist in this loop that I'm running through that are before the version I'm about to create. So I want to find all of them. The next thing I want to do is sort them in order so that I know that the version I'm going to get is the latest one in the list. And then finally, let's say this is all the prior versions. From that, I'll just want to take the last one in the list. Should be my schedule after version. Okay, but what goes in these curly braces here? So this is where I'm gonna move down a bit and start writing a method to help me figure out if a version should be before or after another one. Now, if you're a Java developer in the audience, you're probably thinking, use a comparator, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. Yeah, and in fact, if I look at the Java documentation for the sort method, you'll notice that it actually can take a closure that takes 2 arguments to determine how to sort the individual elements. And I should be able to use something similar in the find all method as well. So since all I really have to work from are the version name and the date string, I have a decision to make, which is, do I want these versions sorted by date or by version number? So another way to put it would be, even if, say, version 90.20.10 was released after version 100.0.0, which one should come later in the list? And so for this example, I'm going to show sorting them by the version string itself, but your project, you may run it differently. So order your versions as you see fit. So for this sort method to work, the comparison operator needs to return a number if it's given two versions. So if I've got version 1 and version 2, and basically if I give it two versions and it's positive, that means the first one is greater. If it returns 0, it means they're the same. And if it returns a negative number, then that means version 2 was the greater. So I need to write my code accordingly. So again, I'm gonna tokenize these, split these versions up so that I can actually get, instead of strings, I want to get real numbers. So I'm gonna convert them to integers. And then I'm gonna do the same thing for version 2. And then I need to compare each of these parts, right? So we know the first version in that list, the major version, is the most important. So if the first part of the version are equal, well, in that case, I'm going to need to go to the second part. But otherwise, if they're not equal, then I can just use the first part of the version string. So if I'm comparing version 100 dot something and 90 dot something, then I can just take the difference of those. And then if parts 2 is greater, we're going to get a negative number. If parts 1 is greater, we're going to get a positive number. But if they're equal, then I need to go to the second element or part of the version. And I basically need to perform the same test. And if you're a real good developer, you're probably thinking, hey, John, couldn't you just write a function to save this logic and reuse it? And the answer is absolutely. Like, I could write a second compare part thing, but the screen's already getting a bit long, so I'm going to do it the dumb way first.
Because we're doing it live.
Right.
And Jonny, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, well, this brings me to a good point for our viewers at home or at work, that Adaptavist makes a lot of built scripts available through the script library, and we will share a link to this very script on the Adaptavist library through the chat. So we'll make sure to have that available for everyone. And if you haven't checked out the script library yet, where you could reuse some content, we've got a thing for you. Yeah,
totally. All right, so having defined this method, that was a bit painstaking, but basically if the first two parts are equal, we'll compare the last two parts. Otherwise, we can return their differences. I should be able to use this to say, first of all, give me only the versions that are prior. So I'll call my little compare versions method that I've created. And I'll need to pass it the version name of the version that I'm thinking about creating, along with the existing version name that's already in the project. So in that case, the existing version is just name. And I can compare these and say any case where this version name is not greater than 0, but any case where the comparison is negative, that means I'm dealing with a lesser version. And then compare versions. And I could do the same thing here and just say it.name version name. And then just the return value of this is enough for the sort function. But I can actually be just a little more clever and treat this method directly as a closure. And that'll give me the sorted version names. Having got that, I just want to take the last one from the list. And then I need to provide the numeric ID. So I'll take afterversion.id. And that might, it occurs to me that on the first run in this script, that version might actually, there might not be a prior version depending on the order these get created in. So I probably need to handle that case. And so if the after version has a value, I'll use the ID. If not, I'm just going to use -1. And that's just a bit of inside baseball. And actually, it might even be more efficient to do this all in one line. So we'll actually check whether prior versions is empty. And then if it is, we use -1 to say that this should be the first version in the list. Otherwise, we'll take the most recent one. And with that, should have my after version ID. And then the last parameter I need for this method, what was it? Control J, or I could just do Control P. And unfortunately, you can't see the pop-up on this window because of the zoom level, but the last parameter I need is whether or not it was released. So we'll just say yes, all these versions from our legacy system are released.
Very nice.
Indeed. There's one last thought I have about this sample data, which is it's possible that some of these issues may have the same version in them. And if that's the case, then I want to find from the versions that existing version. So I'll say find any of them where it's equal to the version name. And if that doesn't return anything, then create the version. All right, so that's all a lot. Notably, I could go ahead and run this script and create the versions, but I want to real quickly go through the next part of this, which is to actually take these versions that we create and throw them into the issue. So for that, you'll recall earlier I grabbed the issue service, and I'm going to call the update method. And if I look at the parameters needed for that, I'm going to discover that I actually need to do a validation first and get a validation result. Again, this is one of the ways the issue service kind of protects you, stops you from making a bad update, like giving a version number that doesn't exist. And to do that, again, just in the interest of time, I'm going to do this pretty quick and say I need to get some new issue input parameters.
Now, folks, Jonny's going to go ahead and get this all in, and he'll explain it in just a moment. It does seem like we're going to be skinning it time-wise, so Alex and I are available to hang out and answers and do a little chatting. Jonny, are you down for staying for a couple of minutes after our time limit?
Yeah, I cleared my calendar for the morning, so I'm good.
Good man.
If you are not, and you need to jam out, do make sure to catch the recording for the thrilling conclusion.
We'll be sending the recording, and remember, if you've sent us a question, we do not want to leave you out there in the cold. We will be sure to respond. We will be in touch with you via email to help you out. Jonny, go on.
All right. Cool. So again, I'm going to use the same logged in user that I used for the search to do this update. I'm going to grab the issue ID and pass in the input parameters. Looks like I've mistyped this.
Jonny, I can't believe it. Mistyping on a live webinar in front of hundreds of people.
Yeah, we're doing it live. So, and then we'll check if the is valid. And if it is, we'll do the update. And again, I just need the application user and the validation results. So all right. And then otherwise, should probably log an error out to say that it failed. And the reason why it failed should be in the error collection. All right. And that, ladies and germs, ought to do it. And this is the part, the real juicy part of live coding is, does it do it? So if everybody can give me a drum roll, I'm going to hit run.
Dun, dun, dun.
Oh, and we have a problem. Compare versions isn't applicable for these things. Oh, and if I look back at my script, I will probably find that I have passed the version objects to this rather than the version names. So
Jonny,
let's back this out. Yeah,
while you fix that, because we are approaching the top of the hour. Now remember, Jonny, Alex, and myself will be, and Andra, our behind the scenes miracle worker. Thank you, Andra. I'm sorry I did not introduce you earlier. We will be hanging out for a few minutes after the webinar. But while Jonny is fixing the script, Andra's going to put up a poll about today's webinar. So if you take just a moment to just click a button or two while Jonny continues to show us what he's doing.
So
awesome.
I hate to say it, but I think it has run. Looking at the logs, it looks like it did find issues and create versions. So now let's actually look at the data.
Nice.
And see how that went. Boom.
Ooh.
Yay.
So we do seem to have some fixed versions. Oh, but what's this? It's only for the first 10. And this is where I realize I made another fun mistake. I left these limited to the first 10. But I can rerun that script. And it should just take a couple of seconds. All right, and it looks like we've filled in the most of it. It's still running while I'm reloading, which is poor form. Looks like it's finished, or it's finishing up. But the key thing to take away from this is I can now do things like sort by the fixed version. And it looks like it's finished because I can now see I've gotten all the way to 1.0. I can now sort properly. Another thing I can do is use ScriptRunner's release date function to see, like, if I want to see if only the fixed versions that were released after January 1st, 2007 and before June 1st, I can do that now that I've got this in a format that can easily be queried. So we'll go ahead and stop there and take the poll. And I think I should just yield the rest of the time to questions and comments from the floor.
Yeah, Jonny, that's fantastic. We're going to start with Alex because we brought him here to ask, we brought him here to talk. So Alex, go on, man.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for this. This was incredibly useful for me. I've been using ScriptRunner for, I guess, 3 or 4 years now, and I learned a lot today. So I hope everybody else did too. And I can't wait to share this with the other members of my community here in Austin as well. A question that I had was, I tend, when I use ScriptRunner, I tend to use script fields a lot. Do you think that script fields for a case like this would be like an applicable solution? And I'd love to just hear your thoughts on how we might be able to use a script field, and if you would recommend either using that or just kind of sticking with something like what you did today.
Yeah, absolutely. So depending on your use case, a script field might actually be the preferred solution here. And there are several reasons for that. One of which is if you were dealing with, it wasn't just a one-time import, but this kind of messy data was getting fed into your system a lot, and you didn't have much control over that feed process, right? So you couldn't change that feed system to say use ScriptRunner to create the version objects for you. And if you knew that the versions that you wanted to query on were going to be available in JIRA by some other means, like say a script job, a script field would actually be a lot simpler in terms of parsing this out. So I even did prepare some script field code to this effect. But basically what you could do is use a version picker field and just take a very small part of the code that we got, which was parsing the version and then finding any versions that match that in the project, just these 20 lines, and get a very similar effect. So yeah, script fields are a very good alternate solution for that. You might be asking, well, like, why didn't you just go to the simple solution at first? And that was like we said, we kind of wanted to go to the garage and dare mighty things for this webinar. So yeah, that's a great question, Alex, and it's I think an open question whether which you would use depending on your use case.
Cool. Yeah, I figured as much, but yeah, I just wanted to get your thoughts on it.
When we first reviewed this, I actually asked Jonny a very similar question. So yeah, good stuff. Another question comes from our good friend Christensen, and he asks, for existing scripts developed in version 7, do we need to update them for version 8?
You bet you do. Although, depending on what's in your scripts, they might all be fine. So Atlassian did change the some of the key APIs. In fact, I gave a shout out to one of them here, which was the JQL search API. Instead of calling it just as this was one of the small updates, but instead of calling the search results.results in JIRA 7, you would call search results.issues. But we actually have a guide for this on our ScriptRunner documentation. Way down here on the left-hand side of the ScriptRunner for JIRA docs, you'll see upgrading to JIRA 8. And we go into detail about what are the key changes, what are the things you need to look at. One of them is that there's some changes to the search API. This is very similar to what we did when the switch from JIRA 6 to 7 made a lot of breaking changes to the API. So yeah, definitely keep an eye on this for as you're doing upgrades and planning them. And again, do your upgrades in test first and kind of test out your script, see what breaks, see what doesn't.
Awesome. We would like to remind everyone that the script Jonny wrote today is actually live in the Adaptavist script library. And Andra, if you got a second, can we share that in the chat, please? We want you to have access to that. We have another question in the. We have a couple of questions that I want to just address directly out. Walters asks, do you have a ScriptRunner cookbook for complete beginners that have no coding experience? Library.adaptavist.com. We want you to head over there. Now that is going to assume you have some knowledge, and we have some other questions that have asked, can we do this for beginners? I'm not going to give you a hard yes.
Yeah, I want to jump in there and say our technical writer has been hard at work building just that. So if you look at the ScriptRunner docs, you'll see on the left hand here this tutorials section. We have started writing those for beginners tutorials for every single feature. And I will say this with love, but if you've been a long time ScriptRunner user, you probably know that there are parts of the documentation that are a bit rough and are not newbie friendly at all. We have a tech writing team that is just working their tails off to fix that, and this tutorials section is sort of the first volley. So definitely check out the script library. That's part of the answer. But if you're looking for, hey, what is a ScriptRunner? How do I even? This tutorial section is definitely where you want to go.
So another great question that came from Mathis. I see that in the script that you wrote, you used both money issue.key and money imported version. Why is that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I actually don't say that out loud. I've never had to say that out loud. Is it $? What do you say?
Right. So the $sign or the money there is let's say $, because dollars aren't money.
Yeah, it's not everyone's money.
That's just what we call string interpolation. So it's a way for me to take one of these variables I've defined and throw them into this string of text. And the reason I did issue.key versus imported version was just I wanted to look at those different bits of data. Or if perhaps your question is, why did I surround it with curly bracers here and not? The answer is just reflex. If you want to do complex code in here, like call say tokenize on this, then you would need the curly bracers. But for accessing simple properties like the issue key, you don't need it. So hopefully that answers your question.
Well, I hope so, Mathis. Chris asks again, if the JQL parser is not updated to results, will the code break?
Yep, sure will.
There it is.
This is actually another reason I wanted to start at the script console, because with script console scripts, they only run when you tell them to. Had I written this as, say, a job, I would have had one big advantage, which is all this use of the JQL API, I wouldn't have had to write. I could have simply created a escalation service, put my JQL query in, and then dealt with each individual issue here in the additional issue actions code snippet. And then you don't have to worry about the JQL API breaking, as long as you don't run more JQL queries here. So
this does expose that ScriptRunner is a very heavily featured product. There are a lot of functions that we didn't even scratch the surface of in today's webinar. So I would say that you should look for upcoming webinars and more information in the library, in our documentation, and through our communication channels. Make sure you're following us on social media at Adaptavist to get the latest and greatest, and some also pretty silly stuff. Being that we have run over already, I do think it's time that we wrap it up. I want to give, and Alex, do you have anything else that you want to add before we call it a day?
Other than thank you for this. This was incredibly valuable, even to someone who's been using this tool for a while. So thank you so much for running through this.
Alex, we want to thank you for participating and for your leadership of the Austin Atlassian community group.
Yeah, thanks.
If you out there in webinar land have not been to an Atlassian community event, it is so worth your time. You've got to come out, and you'll get food, drink, and networking with people who are looking to solve the same problems as you. So Alex has an event coming up. I'll be heading to Atlassian community events in Boston and New York City soon. So if you're on the webinar in the Northeast of America, come to an Atlassian community event and say hi to me. The website, if we could put that in the, there it is. It's in the chat for you. So first of all, thank you again, Alex, for joining us. Thank you, tremendous. I want to give all the props to the one and only Jonny Carter. And thank you so much, Jonny, for instructing us on these. I want to remind you, if we asked a question and we did not answer it, there were a lot of questions we didn't answer, but you're going to hear from us. All right, so look for an email from somebody at adaptavist.com, and we'll be in touch with you. And thanks to Andra for organizing this entire session, putting everything together. All right, so we're going to go ahead and close it up. Thanks again to Alex, Jonny, Andra, and I'm Ryan Spilkin. We'll catch you next time with Adaptavist webinars. Cheers, everyone.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Bye.